As ever, a warm welcome to everyone, and again, many thanks for staying with this series of studies on the end times. I hope everyone had a great week, and I pray as always that you'll take something away tonight that increases your understanding of this quite fascinating topic. Although we travel to a study of Matthew 24 after this set of studies on the Illuminati, in the meantime it's still going to look a bit new agey, if you like, as we consider the more bizarre plans of the Illuminati and the possible links of those to the abomination of desolation. After all, when Zeus was considered the chief of the gods in the days of Antiochus, it was his image that adorned the temple space. But what of a society that's beginning to believe that its origins may lay with advanced extraterrestrial races, who may at any time return to lay claim to us? What sort of god would be placed in the temple's precincts to represent such an understanding? Or what of a society that is exercising a great push to eradicate all religion in its known forms and replace it with the religion of Lucifer? Today's session will be the fourth in a series of 7 sessions relating to the Illuminati and contains a couple of short videos in the mix. It starts with a premise that even the Illuminati will understand that as the abomination of desolation appears in Jerusalem, their own time will be short. They still have to complete the great work they have set themselves, and it may be that nuclear war or a false alien attack or a pole shift or any combination of these have already vastly decreased the human population before this moment in time comes. America may be on its knees after any one of these events, and we have not yet spoken of asteroids, leaving Israel fully exposed to its enemies who are now quick to ransack her. Religion still needs eradicating around the world, but otherwise the Illuminati seem to be entering the home straight as far as their diabolical plan goes. The terrible Great Tribulation begins, and saints are called to preach the gospel boldly to the world just one more time. Life becomes full of life and death decisions for the saint, and they take up their cross daily. The dragon falls from heaven, and his terrible wrath is exposed. The Holy Spirit falls like a heavy rain from heaven, and the saints are newly empowered. The battle begins. So session 20, Understanding the Freemasons and Illuminati, continued, part 4. Let's start with an example of what I would consider to be a fake bit of archaeology, a coin impressed with the image of a grey alien. It's a short video, about 3 to 4 minutes.
U.S. archaeologists have discovered a set of ancient coins that appear to show the head and shoulder of an alien being on its surface. According to UFO hunters, the coins could offer proof that extraterrestrials walk among us. TheMysteriousLife.com reports, a group of people who worked on the renovation of a house in southern Egypt found a number of very rare coins. They call the coins unique because other coins have no images of a strange human figure. It is possible that the coins show visiting aliens on planet Earth? According to many ufologists, the answer is yes. One of the coins has Opportunus Adest carved on the back, Latin for "it's here in due time." Could these creepy coins prove that aliens lived among the ancient Egyptians? The government doesn't want US to know the truth because they are afraid of mass panic. No long ago, an alien relic was found and destroyed in Nazalt, Egypt. The relic, which is the keystone of a city gate, is hundreds of years old, and clearly shows a humanoid alien, possibly a small gray or spaceman, surrounded by ancient glyphs and markings. What is really strange is that when they returned to the same site and wanted to take another look at the ancient figure 4 years later, back in 2009, the carving was gone. They said, "Towards the end of 2009 we returned to take another look at the archway. Within moments of our arrival this time we were being noticed by unfriendly people who began to gather close to us and take an interest. Very quickly we were able to take a look through the crack in the door, as you can see in this pic. There was unexplainable tension in the air and we had to extract ourselves quickly from the situation." Ancient, alien relics were found and destroyed by those who don't want the truth to come about alien life forms. Could there be a bigger secret they were hiding? Why would authorities want to destroy what could be a possible link to us and alien life forms?
Now, this coin, in my opinion, is just part of the great program which has been running since about 2015 to bring people to believe in aliens and UFOs as being a real presence on and around the Earth. The UFO phenomenon, if nothing else, serves as a useful distraction when the shadow government wants to promote unpopular reforms, such as those that further limit public freedoms. To avoid negative reactions to unpopular news, the media can diffuse the effect by distracting the population with some simultaneous item of great public interest. It could be something like discovery of an alien artifact, or it could be a very public UFO sighting, or perhaps it could be the latest book outlining a new theory about human origins. Or, as I think will be happening before long, new warnings from space and fears of an alien attack, or new discussions about the need to set up space defences to defend against malevolent aliens. UFOs, like news of deadly viruses, or discovery of sleeping giants, or the latest terrorist attack in a popular public space, have also been recognised as a good potential tool in future for creating public terror. The fact is that they have already developed these things before they ever publicly ask for the money for them. The money we sign off on now actually goes to the next phase of their program. The first contactees, for instance George Adamski, when telling their stories publicly, were privately funded to travel to many countries, and here's the interesting part, used CIA passports to travel. And so we can guess that it was the CIA that was also funding them. The CIA and secret benefactors were very interested to promote the idea that UFOs are real and carry non-human entities. Although the CIA was formed largely in response to the Roswell incident in 1947, its role over time has been more to create belief in UFOs than to dispel that. However, in modern times, the CIA has taken a bit of a backseat to the military as far as researching the evidence for extraterrestrials goes. But the CIA is still involved in the handling of illegal drug imports and sales for the funding of secret projects, which include the building of advanced anti-gravity flying machines and advanced rocket propulsion systems for space exploration. The CIA is also complicit in keeping wars going overseas and funds its operations in part by selling arms to the various groups that want to keep fighting the wars. This money is fed into the secret budgets. Regular press releases about such secret carryings on by the CIA are stoking the conspiracy fires, but are also at one level acting as a sophisticated distraction. The security slips are quite possibly a deliberate method of blamelessly leaking information to the public to allow them to believe the alien threat and allow them to begin preparing for an unfortunate encounter with aliens in the future. Douglas MacArthur and later Donald Reagan at the United Nations both re-expressed an idea that was actually first stated by John Dewey in the 1920s. Dewey commented that maybe the best way to get everyone on Earth to work together would be to fight against an alien enemy, the ultimate false flag. In public lectures by Linda Howe Moulton, she has unpacked the testimony of at least 2 individuals who physically encountered UFOs and were somehow memory imprinted with long strings of binary data. That's information written in zeros and ones, the language of computer code. In both cases, when the men were triggered in one way or another to remember the data strings, a message of warning emerged, in which an urgent request was given for the world's best minds to get together and work harder on their science and their space defences, as an alien threat was on the way. In this clever message, also supported by the message given by a somewhat cheesy-looking crop circle bearing the image of a grey alien and a CD-like digitized message in the crop circle rings, at least 4 messages were conveyed at once. First of all, aliens are real, and certain benevolent aliens are speaking to us. 2. There is a threat to Earth from malevolent aliens. So it looks like the aliens are telling the same story as our propagandists on Earth are. 3. Human beings must put aside differences and work together to save the future. 4. Human beings must build powerful defenses in space to deter malicious aliens both now and in the future. These defenses should also be placed on the moon, displacing any malevolent beings that might already be there. Now, Werner Braun, whom the Americans took from Nazi Germany as part of Operation Paperclip and placed in their own rocketry programs, repeatedly told his assistant, Karen Rosen, that technology was being developed for the shadow government to stage a convincing but ultimately fake alien invasion. The mass abduction of human beings by UFOs could also be passed off as the Christian rapture, so this teaching could play into their hands. Dispelling this theory will be helpful. At least it will take away a stumbling block here. Fake coins showing aliens in Roman times have recently surfaced, and that was what our video was about, as if aliens have been living with us on Earth since pre-Christian times. The fake alien invasion may involve aliens who have actually been bred on Earth, flying craft actually built on Earth, but the destruction of property and the killing of humans will be real enough, even if it is the ultimate false flag. Film producers are also making films that deal with alien encounters, for instance, Close Encounters of a Third Kind, and with wars in space, compare Star Wars, etc. The transcript of Reagan's 1980 CIA briefing indicates that the CIA actually has a direct influence over such films. In 2011, National Geographic aired a television documentary entitled When Aliens Attack. It was stated that a confirmed alien detection would see no action before the issue was placed before the United Nations, making it a global defense issue. Curiously, in the last couple of years, NASA funding has all but been stripped away and redirected to private space companies, Blue Origin being an example. These companies have a mandate from the government to launch a range of manned and unmanned satellites to be armed with space-based lasers for space defense. Hopefully that's all those lasers are for. The government suddenly seems to have real fears that something could attack the Earth from space. Another recent oddity is what seems to be the presence of a sun simulator in space. This huge hexagonal array of incandescent lights, with associated satellites, designed by Boeing in 1973, appears, at least at times, to be following the sun and gathering and refocusing the sun's light through lenses that power the array. Has the ability to create a steady flux from the sun, when the sun itself may be burning either very bright or otherwise more dimly, say orange at the moment, perhaps as a consequence of a large foreign body, such as a dark second sun, moving through the solar system at the moment. The lens system has the ability to temporarily hide such an object if it moves across the line of sight from sun to Earth. Now, there seems to be nothing treacherous in having such a sun simulator, but it has been noted over the last few months that there have been extremely high UV measurements going on in the world, and this is actually in high latitudes like 51 degrees north, which is a long way away from the equator, where already the UV ratings were 3 to 4 times higher than average. So maybe the sun simulator is actually a way of blocking some of that light and protecting us a bit. It's hard to say. But anyway, the truth of climate science is that the overall trend on Earth is global cooling, but certainly weather extremes are becoming greater. If the sun simulator temporarily switched off during the famous August 21st American solar eclipse, it could explain why the thermal image did not drop to a much cooler temperature when pointed at the moon in front of the sun. It was still picking up the heat from the simulator. The presence of such a simulator does beg the question of why, and suggests that a rogue planet may well be in the solar system already and affecting the sun. Either that, or it is simply an experiment being run by NASA. And let me just speak a little bit more about the thermal image. Somebody was using a thermal character on the sun as it went into eclipse, and what should happen is the black body radiation spectrum should shift dramatically after the moon goes in front of the sun to represent the fact that all that light and heat coming from the sun is temporarily blocked. And so it should then pick up the image of the moon, which should be much cooler, especially on its shadow side. But what happened as the sun was occulted is that the thermal spectrum stayed exactly the same. The temperature of the moon seemed to be the same as the temperature of the sun, and this was an oddity that was never explained. But anyway, back to the asteroid and UFO threats. Clearly, the suggestion given by the alien messages that have been so-called sent was that the world needs a multinational global defense network to be set up and to defend against these malevolent aliens. What's the real reason, however, for such a network if the aliens are not in fact there and if the threats are actually false? Well, the putting of a global surveillance network into space would allow the controllers of the world to monitor nearly anything happening on Earth. And that would be possibly in readiness for the transition to the New World Order and the global superstate. It may have nothing to do with defending the Earth from alien threats. And in fact, Werner Braun did say it was a hoax. Although human beings tend to believe from school days onwards that wars are just a product of nations competing for some resource they both want, this is not always the case. Sometimes wars start in obscure ways, such as in Syria, for instance, where the war started after the government cracked down on street protesters who were simply protesting against the incarceration of a youth who had criticised the government. The government could well have left this alone. This was really only a civil matter, but somehow powerful forces jumped in and escalated the street protests into, first of all, a government crackdown and then a civil war. Once the civil war got started, rebels and ISIS also suddenly turned up. And one would have to wonder how they managed to get organised so quickly. Now, such wars are scripted by globalist governments, who are the only real terrorists in this world. They start wars to destroy countries and make money, and then financially enslave the country in its rebuilding. They create the wars in the first place, and then cry that something is needed that will unify the nations and put war behind the human race forever. War is a sign that the forces of evil are on the march, trying to ruin countries for a greater so-called utopia, but the vision is satanic. So there's really some significance in the words of Jesus in Matthew 24 that there will be wars in various places with many famines and earthquakes. And elsewhere it says wars and rumours of wars. These wars, especially if escalating for almost no apparent reason, are very likely to be the working of evil men and are signs of the end approaching. Toward the end of all these wars, we will see the last great Antichrist. Although he may, as many Christian teachers insist, be a kind of peacemaker, urging the cessation of war, I think it is more likely that he too will be a warmonger, however. It will be in his nature. Paul's explanations about the end of the age indicate that a man of sin will sit in the Jerusalem temple and declare himself to be God. And this in itself means that war has come to Israel and Israel has succumbed, and perhaps also America with it. Despite many teachings to the contrary, this all seems to indicate that Israel will again be invaded and the Jews cast from their land. And Israel's temple, by then functional, if not fully restored, will suffer yet another desecration, as if the Jews are once again being rejected by God. The abomination of desolation will be more than just a desecrating symbol within Israel. It will also mark the beginning of the last phase of the takeover bid of the Illuminati. And they know their time will be short, so they'll be full steam ahead on every front. The objective from then on will be to accelerate the ruin of all countries and build a new world order from the ashes. This is why I predict not peace, but an escalation in violence with the arrival of the Antichrist. But where does it go from there? Well, here is a possible scenario. Iran, in responding to US-backed Saudi aggression against them, may have defeated the Saudis, who they think are crypto-Jews anyway, and gone on to shed rivers of Middle Eastern blood in Israel, Egypt, and as far as Libya. A simultaneous campaign by the US against Iran may have seen attempts at nuclear retaliation by Iran, including launches on Israel and even Europe, but a Russian attack on the US could well damage the United States so badly that Iran will be able to persecute its cause against Israel without answer. The Muslim Antichrist will set up his camp between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, ready to start a systematic purge of the Jewish people. To his aid will come the Vatican, which has meanwhile become anti-Jewish and anti-American, and is probably struggling for survival after a major church collapse brought on by modern investigations into the Vatican. The Pope may make a visit to Jerusalem to stake his claim upon the city and temple site and try talking to the Muslims. Arab and Muslim groups, for their part, would be likely to see something like this as an eschatological sign, and would become emboldened to propagate new attacks against Western targets in Europe and elsewhere. But just when no one is looking upwards, a terrible swarm of UFOs will descend over major cities in the world and begin abducting thousands of people, and these attacks may continue for months. These alien invaders will spray cities with viruses and destroy major tactical targets with laser weapons, the same weapons that were supposedly there for space defense. These particular aliens will just be a creation of the Illuminati, working together with the now struggling military-industrial complex of the United States to try and regain control of the situation. After all, with America laying on its knees, they will also have lost a great deal of their funding, and their operations will be facing grinding to a halt. So the Illuminati will claim that the aliens are the same entities as the ancient gods, just as the occult myths have been saying as well, and these ancient gods have now been resurrected in their story. They have come for food, but they have also come in time to restore the world to the fabled social perfection of Atlantis, now represented by the New World Order. They are familiar with that ancient society and once lived among the people there. That's their claim, and this city may well have been excavated for them already, as it seems that a section of Antarctica may have been that fabled land, but in a time when that part of Antarctica lay at a much different location on the Earth. These ancient gods, perhaps called the Anunnaki, may even be honoured as our creators. This would be the ultimate insult to the biblical narrative. However, the truth is that these Anunnaki are probably just fallen angels, trying to deceive the world's citizens. And what exactly are we to understand of the desecration of the temple? If we were to follow the Greek models of the past, we might suggest that something like a statue of Lucifer could be set up in the holy place. A Roman model might lead us to expect the image of a human emperor, but an Illuminati model might lead us to expect perhaps a statue of Lucifer, the illuminist equivalent to ancient Baal, in God's temple, which would probably be the most extreme form of sacrilege possible, as this is also the deity worshipped by the Canaanites, who were driven out before Joshua as Israel first conquered the land. Lucifer, perhaps even as the leader of the Anunnaki, may then begin to make ridiculous claims, such as that he himself had created man from the apes. He will have to appeal to DNA evidence. And in the human genome, 2 chromosomes found in apes are merged end-to-end, that is, they share a common centromere, changing the 46 chromosomes of the ape into the 46 of the human being. Well, the rest of the genes and chromosomes are not identical, but there is at least a numerical match. So this change in chromosome numbers is the major, if not quite only difference, and this merging of 2 ape chromosomes into 1 human chromosome could possibly have been achieved by highly advanced geneticists. Comparison of nuclear DNA to mitochondrial DNA suggests that human DNA could indeed have been supplemented by an external source of DNA when humans were formed. And I should point out that the nuclear DNA is the DNA found in the nucleus of cells, whereas the mitochondrial DNA is in the mitochondria of those cells. Mitochondrial DNA is passed on from mother to mother. It's a kind of we can track the female lines of human ancestry through the mitochondrial DNA, but the Y chromosome DNA is a trace of male ancestry. Anyway, human mitochondrial DNA places human origins at no earlier than 200,000 years ago, but this is talking from an evolutionary point of view. Skeletal evidence on that same scale has hominids, 46 chromosome beings, walking around on Earth since about 3 million years ago. But modern man does not therefore seem to be descended from the beings whose ancient hominid remains we hold. And so, the arising of the modern man from 200,000 years ago is quite separate from the remains that date to 3 million years if we're going to follow evolutionist arguments. So the modern man is not actually related to those ancient hominids at all. In fact, a Neanderthal child was found in a cave in 1987 in northern Europe. The body was dated at 30,000 years using evolutionary arguments. The Neanderthal fossil was well enough preserved to get some DNA sequencing, but much to the surprise of the researchers, the DNA profiles obtained show that modern humans are almost too different from Neanderthals to have evolved from them. We may have coexisted with them, but it appears we did not evolve from them. The difference in feet, hair patterns, and bone density, let alone the skull differences, even makes the connection of modern man with Neanderthals dubious. Now, I'm certainly no expert in genetics or DNA, but I understand, I hope, at least a few of the basic ideas and the significance of some of the more recent discoveries about human DNA. Much of this is still unpublished in the regular media, and for obvious reasons. One discovery that is hard to get around, though, is the quite young age ascribed to modern man by the evidence of the mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA is found on the chromosomes transmitted by mothers. It traces the DNA of a man or woman's mothers, etc., right back to the original mother, who we might say is Eve. It is a kind of fundamental strand of specifically female DNA. The mitochondrial evidence around the world has reduced the first populations of modern man, or perhaps should we say women, to as few as 4 family groups, all in the same part of the world. And there's one gene, if it's not a mutation, that could single out just one family, and this gene is sometimes perhaps lightly called the Eve gene. If we look at the male Y chromosome, we find that there are more variations than in the corresponding female chromosome. And there are a number of sequences seen there in certain populations of males that seem to be unexplained. By unexplained, we mean these sequences in the DNA are not seen in hominid cousins of the modern human, or even in the likes of Neanderthal man. This opens up the possibility that unexplained sequences may have been introduced by the genetic tampering of the fallen angels and by certain individuals who learned their secrets in the pre-flood days. It is not necessarily because an alien species married human women and introduced these genes. Of course, another way to account for unique DNA sequences is to accept that man was indeed created outright by God and did not evolve from apes or any other progenitor. It is only as we argue from a tenacious belief in Darwinist origins that we need to find new candidates for our progenitors. One is almost forced, therefore, to posit the intermarriage of an alien male with a human female to account for these anomalies on the male Y chromosome. And this would seem now to converge with the biblical narrative, where it is the fallen angels who become those males who take human women to be their wives. But this errant seed was supposedly eliminated at the flood, and Noah's Tamim seed was preserved for a new start, with original Adamic DNA presumably still largely intact. Why then would the errant Y chromosome information persist in Noah's seed? It seems the source of this extra Y chromosome information is not the fallen angels, who we have no reason to believe were truly human in any case. Indeed, if we think about it, the whole idea of angels breeding with humans seems highly improbable. First of all, there would need to be a match in chromosome numbers. Even if there was a match, it's more probable than not that there would be some important differences in the locations and numbers of genes on those chromosomes. Modern genetics has at least shown that genes are laid out along chromosomes in a kind of map of the human body. And even other animals have similar layouts. All the same, there are about 20,000 genes on the chromosomes of the female that need to be matched with the same genes on the male chromosomes. And the potential for serious errors, deleterious errors, as they like to say, is really very high. There is a tendency to think, then, that the fallen angels may have used technological methods to obtain their first offspring. They could, for instance, have taken the female's own DNA and copied it to produce an exact match to the female's DNA in the children. The only thing necessary to produce male offspring would be to swap out the female sex-determining chromosome and replace it with a male one. They may have known ways to do this. Male and female children would both then have been a kind of clone of their mother. It would only be necessary to do this in the first generation of this new race. With humans, as with tomatoes, if you start doubling genes, you get outcomes like size enhancement. Marry two such offspring together, and the effect occurs again, now enlarging the first enlargement. And within a generation or two, the children of such breeding turn into giants, human supertoms. And of course, the Bible reports that giants appeared after the angels took human women to be their wives. But all of this happens not because the genetic introduction is alien, but because it is a manipulation of purely human DNA. Somewhere in the human record, another anomaly occurred. Some groups of people lost from the DNA on chromosome 1 the ability to clot blood and stop bleeding. The gene responsible for this in the primates has been identified in the rhesus monkey and is colloquially called the rhesus factor. Your blood type is rhesus positive or rhesus negative. You have the gene or you don't have it. Most of us thankfully have this gene. The fact that some human beings, females included, do not have this gene therefore calls into question the theory that human beings are direct descendants of a primate ancestor, as all other primates still have this gene and it has never mutated or been deleted in other primates. The rhesus gene is otherwise of obscure function, and the molecule produced most prolifically by this gene is the type that transports ammonia in the blood. Problems can occur in pregnancy if rhesus negative and rhesus positive marry together, much in the way of giving blood of the wrong type in a transfusion. But if rhesus negative and rhesus negative marry together, the family line will almost be trapped in perpetuity in the rhesus negative cycle. The only genetic way to remedy this error is to forbid rhesus negative people from begetting children, and that's probably not going to happen. So how did this mutation actually arise? Well, the role of radiation in creating such genetic anomalies is overplayed. Most radiation-based mutations involve partial damage to DNA, but not complete and incisive deletion of the hundreds of base pairs that make up a complete gene. The rhesus defect appears to have come from somewhere outside the hominid genome, and some will argue that it was an error made while modifying human DNA in other ways. Rhesus-negative people also have some unusual characteristics, such as an extra vertebra, exceptional eyesight, and a higher intuitive function. Human beings are in the same general biological group as monkeys and apes, which is the primates, but there is still no direct evidence that we have evolved from any of the other animals in this group, or they from us. Nevertheless, the number of chromosomes in the group is similar. Gorillas and monkeys have 48 chromosomes, and human beings have 46. But there is evidence at some stage that at some stage 2 of the original chromosomes joined at their centromeres and became one, budding off human beings from the apes. Is it possible, the modern preachers of an extraterrestrial Adam say, that the post-Adamic manipulations of certain individuals might have introduced modifications into the genome that resulted in small errors on chromosomes, or that they tried similar modifications on other primates and created the hominids that became, for instance, Neanderthals? Based on a desire to stay in line with the biblical narrative, I will suggest, archaeological dating aside, that the fallen angels, who are clearly tampering with nature before the flood, may have produced these hominids as part of a human genetic engineering project. This could also have produced an ape-like human who lived alongside the human beings created by God, and who, for his part, may have been more like a Cro-Magnon human being. This may explain why Cro-Magnon man still shows many differences from modern man, and why proof of descent of modern man from the Cro-Magnon is still far from confirmed. To make things even more confusing, it also remains possible that both Cro-Magnon man and modern man could occasionally have crossbred with other hominids, which is another way the angels would have succeeded in tainting the human race and imperiling the messianic promise. The fulfillment of God's promise would require a person and bloodline of undefiled DNA. Indeed, Russian history of only 150 years ago records such a union of human and Yeti-like hominid, and 3 children of that union are buried in Russian graves today with living descendants. I think the picture in the background is actually from one of those hominids. The problem for Christians is that the Sumerians, who described the solar system so intricately, including the presence and the color of planets like Uranus and Neptune, and who obviously had access at some point to significant technologies, also describe the origins of man, like the Adamu, who they call him, which is so clearly close to Adam, or Adam from the Hebrew. They describe the Adamu as being from the Anunnaki, with man being bred from Anunnaki DNA to be a slave race in the South African gold mines. It's not clear, though, if this Adamu was God's Adam and Eve or a later angelic corruption of it, such as the Neanderthal. Nevertheless, the DNA pathway does indeed trace some of the earliest human life to Central and South Africa, and to the same period as is also indicated from the earliest branches in the mitochondrial DNA tree. So it could support that theory. The Illuminists have their own way of reading the Genesis text to support the Sumerian creation story. When one considers the harsh punishment meted out to the man and his wife for disobedience to their creator/master, that is God, and the daily visits of the deity to the garden, it seems possible that the visits were really so that the deities could check on daily production in Eden's gardens. Adam and Eve may have been created, they argued, to produce a working class for the gods, and in time to serve in the function of supplying the gods with their food. In exchange, no doubt, the gods would have offered mankind their protection, and so the alternative reading goes. This is probably the most commonly entertained notion among those who study these matters without faith in the Hebrew Scriptures as they stand, and who seek an integration between evidence for alien life forms that visited the Earth thousands of years before, the anomalies found in human DNA, and the propensity of humans to worship their creator. It is this kind of integration of ideas, along with occult communications with spirits, that allows for the pseudo-rational promotion of Lucifer in the occult forum. Lucifer, among other things, becomes a symbol of the spirit of knowledge that is liberating man from his first fate as a slave. And it is precisely a tree of knowledge, albeit good and evil, that we find in the Genesis account as accepted by Jews and Christians. However, this is also the material, I believe, that will be used to substantiate the powerful lie that Christians must defend themselves against in this final phase of history. This is the lie that the aliens actually created, an alien race that was advanced actually created humanity and put themselves forward as our gods. There's also a false assumption that the Sumerians, in being the closest civilization to the pre-flood world, would be the most likely to be speaking in mythological terms in their creation accounts, and so are largely telling the truth when they speak of a slave race called the Adamu. Well, to this end, it's rather interesting that the Antichrist is referred to as Sargon III, that is, an Assyrian, in some occult circles, and is considered to be the keeper of the Assyrian secrets. These new DNA discoveries may cause men to think they have found their true origins, causing them to reject the biblical account as a reworked narrative. At the end of the day, however, this new answer does nothing more than replace an evolution from apes explanation with an evolution from aliens one. The reality is more likely to be that it was the tampering of the fallen angels that produced these DNA anomalies and the hominids. And it may be that the many genetic errors that we see, there's about 4,000 in total, and perhaps 40 in any one individual, as we now see them in the human genome, came not from the imprecision of alien gene splicing, but supernaturally through God passing a curse over fallen man, and indeed over the entire natural world, to deliberately ruin his perfect work in Eden, to bring back man to an early death, and to make man a being in deep search for redemption. There are a number of unexplained sequences on the human Y chromosome, so let's recap a little. Many people also lack the rhesus gene, which all apes and monkeys have. These features might have arisen from genetic engineering. Humanists might argue that God was attempting to create man as a slave, perhaps explaining his severity in the Genesis story toward the disobedient first human couple. The doctrine of Lucifer might present Lucifer as a more tolerant deity, and indeed as an emancipator of mankind. And Lloyd Pye's video, which would also summarize all these things, entitled "Everything You Thought You Knew Is Wrong," will give you an alternative discussion of these DNA issues. But he also promotes that idea of alien ancestors. He sees it as an inescapable conclusion, but of course he's not including in his deliberations the possibility that there really is a supernatural God who was able to create man from the dust, as the Genesis text tells, and to supernaturally affect human genetics, which of course is what Christians and Jews believe. Now, what makes the Sumerian account so compelling is its other special story, which is very possibly correct. And this account was no doubt available to Moses as well before he wrote his own creation account. The Sumerian account goes back to 2000 BC, whereas Moses is writing it about late 1500s. This story explains how the infant Earth started life as a planet called Tiamat, orbiting the Sun from beyond Mars. A giant planet called Nibiru, perhaps orbiting a dark binary twin of the Sun, crossed the solar system like a planetary comet. Unfortunately, one of its moons collided with the Earth, and it sent a good deal of the Earth's mass and ocean into space, and this debris became the asteroid belt. The Earth was also deflected into its current orbit to a place within that of Mars, and the molten Earth recircularized and cooled to its present state. This would correspond to day one of the Genesis account, when land appeared from primal ocean, and the recent cratering seen on the moon would become explicable from this debris scattered by Earth's impact with Nibiru's moon. The Sumerians assert that life moved from the oceans of Nibiru's moon to Earth's oceans during the impact. The story does not support the notion, however, that inhabitants travelled from Nibiru to Earth to become our human progenitors. In fact, the Earth would have been far too hot and unstable after this collision to allow that to have occurred. It's also unclear whether this planet is in a permanent orbit, which has been what's feeding the Planet X or Nibiru narrative of recent years, and has made this YouTube topic the most visited of all between 2012 and 2016. Current suggestions are that Nibiru passes through the solar system about every 3,600 years, and NASA models seem to use a similar figure, but no real proof has otherwise been offered for the theory. In fact, there are possibly better theories that it's every 360 years, and that this planet has passed through maybe 10 times in that time. And either way, the next pass is actually due in the next, now or within the next 50 or 60 years. I think the idea that aliens travelled from Nibiru to Earth on later orbits and went on to create man will be the lie that tries to replace the Genesis account of a true deity who has made man, not as a slave, but in fact as his co-regent and representative in the world. If we consider the Genesis text and the responsibility that God gave to man, you can see that man actually had a very high status, nothing slave-like about it. And without recognition of God as the true source of man's being, the world's new philosophy will reject all religions for a fully humanistic worldview. Man will now become his own God and state it defiantly, ransacking the temple of the highest God to do so. A fake alien invasion is all that is needed to confirm the presence of intelligent aliens, and to set seal to the new doctrine of man's original evolution from self-centered aliens, of whom the biblical chief must be the worst. With Nibiru currently in the solar system, and more on this later, and with the Cassini satellite throwing itself into Saturn's atmosphere in September 2017, it may be possible to claim that a race living on Saturn has retaliated and launched an attack on the Earth. Lists of aliens that have been produced probably by the CIA or their operatives on YouTube include tall insect-like species that supposedly live on Saturn. I think it would be safe to say that all of this is disinformation. Douglas MacArthur already said in his day that World War III would be interplanetary, and apparently said this based on his exposure to alien species. He apparently spoke with visitors face to face, but one wonders if he was not also the victim of a fraud perpetrated by his own military-industrial complex. While all of this may wax great in the heads of the Illuminists, and while trillions may have been invested in secret programs to produce super soldiers and fleets of powerful craft in space, ready to launch the final great deception against mankind, God continues quietly with his plans to redeem his people Israel and to redeem saints around the world. And so it will have to be a lie like this that replaces the Genesis account of a true deity who has made man not as a slave, but as a kind of co-regent in the world. And without recognition of God as the true source of man's being, the world's new philosophy will reject all religions for a fully humanistic worldview. Man will become his own God and state it defiantly, ransacking the temple of the highest God to do so. Now this picture in the background here, you see Jesus speaking to the raging sea, which then responds by quietening down. And Jesus is supposed to represent the true authority that man was born with, authority even over nature. Now, no genetically modified animal could do such a thing. Anyway, while all of this will wax great in the heads of the Illuminists, and while trillions may have been invested in those secret programs to produce super soldiers and fleets of powerful craft in space ready to launch that great deception against mankind, God is continuing with his plans to redeem his people Israel. What men plan for evil, God, as usual, is able to turn for good. And this invasion of Israel by its old enemies, the Arabs, is the final step in the humiliation of Israel that will hopefully bring Israel back to God like the prodigal son. Jesus spoke of the days of Jacob's trouble, a time of discipline so severe that only Israel's friendships with the church would help it get through. A time when Jew and Gentile would be brothers in one religious faith, when Israel would understand that it is not a messianic nation, but a nation in need of its Messiah. Like the shaming of a proud fool, it is painful experience necessary to the nation's full restoration in God. Aside from the effects of this invasion on Israel, there are also lessons to be learned about the Vatican and the Illuminati. The Vatican has spent most of its adult life, so to speak, wondering how to acquire Jerusalem as its possession. From Jerusalem as an infant, to Rome as a teenager, to Constantinople as an adult, and finally back to Jerusalem in its old age, would read as a good story. But the Vatican has fallen into a kind of trap that afflicts many of the media's brightest stars. It has come to believe all the hype about itself and has forgotten that it wrote the hype itself. She really has, to use strong Protestant language, become a tired old whore, interfering in everyone's business, and history is waiting patiently for her to die and be buried. Islam has already proclaimed a celebration for the day its green banner will flap from the spires of the Vatican. The Vatican will never be far from the top of the list of Islamic trophies. The Illuminati, born from corrupt Vatican seed, also dislikes the old harlot intensely. For its part, the Vatican is busy claiming the Illuminati as its own, as the creation of one of its most distinguished sons, Saint Loyola. But Loyola was himself a Moranas Jew, and of that seed that the Vatican had already deemed to be under a curse. Spiritually, the only thing the Vatican and the Illuminati share in common is an illegitimate son, by which I mean the Society of Jesus. The son is better known to his friends, of course, as Jesuit. The Jesuit order is to the Church, if you like, as Esau was to Jacob. One was hairy, the other was smooth. One was rough, the other was gentle. One is common, the other is sophisticated. One likes hunting stories, the other prefers the stories of God's greatness. But it is not only the Jews who will go into the cauldron of affliction in these days. The Christian saints will also suffer great affliction as part of the final purification rites, if you like, of the bride. The Catholic Church will have one last chance to swallow its pride and come with reconciliation and penance to its Orthodox and Protestant brothers and resist the persecution together. But it will probably find this just too hard. It's too late in the day for it to change, and to preserve itself, the Catholic Church will probably choose sides with the New World Order instead, and think to solve its religious crisis at a later time. It may also hope that the New World Order will exterminate these Orthodox and Protestant brothers altogether, and solve a big, long-standing problem on its behalf. But as the New World Order is chosen ahead of the Protestant brothers, the Catholic Church will again become complicit in the deaths of countless innocent Christians, and will bring the wrath and rejection of God down upon itself. It will not be long, therefore, before the punishing angel who has been set loose at this time to test all hearts also extends its reach to the Catholic Church. And the Catholic Church, of course, can never be accepted with God if this is the ethic it follows in the search to become the only single light representing God in the world. God will just simply reject it. And rather than allow his true church to be destroyed, God is sure to fight for his true church at the expense of the Catholic one. The Vatican will also eventually be conquered and the Catholic faith declared illegal. No doubt a desecrating figure will be set up even in St. Peter's Basilica to mirror the image set up in Jerusalem. And this leaves only the Illuminati, which enjoys enough independence from the Catholic Church to avoid serious damage in the Catholic fall. They will already have been disassociating themselves from the Vatican as the final Antichrist appears in Jerusalem. Their affiliation is in reality with the United States military-industrial complex and with the worshippers of Satan, and with as many as stand against the two great biblical religions. The Illuminati, not failing the vision of Albert Pike, will become the masters of the Third World War and the makers of wars. But they will probably have to see off the two presidential terms of Donald Trump first, leaving them to get back to their evil work after 2024. They will then orchestrate new wars and change laws everywhere to ready the world for the New World Order. And they will unveil Lucifer to the world and speak of the tyrannies of the old religions that have just been displaced, and the need to eradicate all of their followers. They will encourage the Muslims to help them in this cause and show them favour, indeed placing an Arab ruler on the throne in Jerusalem. But this leader will be more of an Illuminist than a Muslim, and only when the great plan of overthrow and replacement reaches its crescendo, and both Christianity and Judaism appear to be exterminated from the world, will he begin speaking of his disdain even for the religion of Islam, and his true allegiance to the God of rebellion, who is Lucifer himself. It will be in the second coming that the Islamic nations and all Illuminists will in turn be exterminated, and in which all nations will be judged for their actions in this time, and indeed over all of history. Are there lessons for the Arabs? Well, the Arabs are an interesting case. Now, Abraham prayed for Hagar's son Ishmael, and although he'd grown up to be 13 years old and Abraham had thought he was the promised son, the day came when God told Abraham to send Hagar and her son Ishmael away. Of course, Abraham was extremely upset, and he prayed to God that God would give Ishmael a blessing. And God agreed to do that. But that never took away from the hatred that still developed in Ishmael for Isaac, or the hatred of Hagar for Sarah. Like Abraham, his son Isaac wept that the blessing he had reserved for his own best-loved son Esau had been stolen by his other son Jacob, and that little was then left for Esau. But it was Isaac's own flesh nature that had caused him to treat his two sons too unequally. And because God's favour was with Jacob, it became necessary for God to get the blessing destined for Esau turned over to Jacob. Now God placed the idea in the mind of Jacob's own mother, and she convinced Jacob to participate in the deception and steal that birthright. Afterwards, so disappointed by his father's failure to pick up the deception, and furious at his mother and brother for conspiring against him, he departed from the land and went to live with the Ishmaelites, where they undoubtedly traded stories and experiences. Indeed, his many travels in the land had probably seen him forging strong ties already with local Arabs, and this may lay at the heart of his rejection by God. But Israel's ties to the Arabs would also have been severed as soon as Esau was relegated, given that Jacob, as far as we can tell, had no real relations with anyone outside his campsite. The Midianites and their brothers were also Arab tribes and lived to the northeast of Egypt. Now Moses, when he fled from Egypt and his own people, had also married into this Midianite people, into a high Midianite family, and these connections would in the end save Israel as they waited out 40 years in the Arabian wilderness, living with the Midianites. In fact, he had married the daughter of one of the Midianite chiefs. But the Midianite princes after Jethro were less enamored of Moses and his people, and they soon ganged up with Israel's other enemies to try and destroy Israel as they moved out of Arabia and towards Moab. As Moses departed with his wife and sons, his favour in Arabia also departed with him. And there's an interesting principle here in the Bible that God is able to make one's enemies be at peace with the saint when he needs to bring them, protection and safety. And that as soon as God is able to then move his saints to another place and takes that sort of covering off those people, that hatred returns. In Moab and Ammon, Joshua encountered the descendants of Lot, which was the cousin of Abraham, who, although being born of a close relative to Abraham, were regarded by Israel as a defiled people. In fact, Lot, to remind us, was the one who escaped Sodom and Gomorrah. His daughters thought the whole world had been destroyed, and they slept with him to conceive and give birth to another nation. So the nations, Moab and Ammon, were actually born from incest, which is why the Jews thought of them as being defiled. They also resented the fact that their ancestor Lot had lost everything in Canaan, while Abraham had come away rich. But this loss on Lot's part had stemmed from his greed in choosing Canaan's best portions for himself. The children of Abraham's third marriage were also eventually therefore located with the Arabs, but had no cause for complaint. However, as children sidelined from the blessings of the 12 tribes of Israel, they had also joined the general Arab resentment of Israel, who claimed the promise of becoming a great nation in the land. Throughout history, then, the Arabs, as the second-rate seed of Abraham, if we can put it that way, have resented Israel and refused to hear of its calling and blessings. How quickly then they embraced the religion of Islam, also a second-rate religion, and have used it to create a false holiness for themselves that seeks to legitimize the people in God's eyes. But it doesn't work that way, and it can't, because even Israel's legitimacy has been removed since the New Testament came along. The place of legitimacy is now, in fact, under the blood of Christ, who is Redeemer not only of Israel, but of the whole world. Christ is really the great equalizer, bringing Arab status back into line with that of Israel, but the Arabs have hearts that have grown too cold overall to receive it. Instead, they receive the religion of a false Messiah, Muhammad. How significant, then, to the Arab mind, that Israel should, at the final hurdle fall into Arab hands. To the confused Arab mind, this is a sign from Allah, who incidentally is not the same as Abraham's God, Jehovah. To say that in the end of days, Israel has at last suffered the rejection that long ago was endured by Ishmael, as is only fitting for the end of days. Muhammad's assertion that Isaac stole Ishmael's birthright is also believed and further drives the error. The Arab occupation of Canaan and Jerusalem therefore seems to them to be the hand of Allah, and all of this false belief allows God to use them in this great final outreach to the proud nation Israel. You see, there's nothing more humiliating to Israel than to be driven out by the Arabs, and this only intensifies the experience of being displaced from the land. But it's in this place of shame that hope springs eternal, that Israel as a nation might still be saved. The proud king of Daniel, that is the Antichrist, will set up his tents in Jerusalem, and possibly right there on Mount Zion where the old temple site was. Daniel 11:45 says he'll put up his tents, and that suggests perhaps a Bedouin connection or a Bedouin army, which may be another way of pointing to an Arab force. Tents are also indicative of a military encampment, temporary dwellings that might be there when an army invades another land. Anyway, to summarize, why does God allow this invasion of Israel? Why does he allow the Arabs to conquer the land of Israel? Isaiah 27:9, to purge her, Israel, of sins until he redeems her fully. We can read about that in Isaiah 29 verses 5 through 7. The passage says, by this then will Jacob's guilt be atoned for, and this will be the full fruit of the removal of his sin. Now notice it's the full fruit, so this is something Israel has to do to show it has been redeemed. When he makes all the altar stones to be like limestone crushed to pieces, no Asherah poles or incense altars will be left standing. And this is to do with the purging of Baal and Asherah worship in the land, which we still have modern forms of. So even modern Israel can fulfill this prophecy. And the completion of that redemption is also related to and how God is going to achieve it at the end of the world. Isaiah 29:5-7, but your many enemies will become like fine dust. We're speaking here of the Islamic armies, but also the Illuminati, the ruthless hordes like blown chaff. Remember Daniel 2, the rock came from heaven, struck the statue, and it turned into like the chaff that was blown in the wind. So this is the same idea completely. Your many enemies will become like fine dust, and the ruthless hordes like blown chaff. Suddenly, in an instant, the Lord Almighty will come with thunder and earthquake and great noise, with windstorm and tempest and flames of a devouring fire. And then the hordes of all the nations that fight against Ariel, by the way, Ariel is a code name in Isaiah 29 for the city of Jerusalem. It means both lion of God and an altar covered with blood, depending on how the vowel pointing is done. Then the hordes of all the nations that fight against Ariel will attack her and her fortress and besiege her, and it will be as a dream, like a vision in the night. Now, one of the other great reasons God allows this invasion of Israel by the Arab hordes, and should we say Islamic hordes, it's not just to push the Jews into a place of such deprivation that they finally turn to God and begin to believe in Jesus Christ, but it's also to allow the world to come to its complete and utter manifestation of evil, just like it was in the days of Noah, when the thoughts of men were only evil all the time, continually. And just as it was with Joshua, that the people of Canaan were just completely evil, completely lost to sin in those 40 years that the Israelites were still in the wilderness, to the point that God was able to say to Joshua, go in and destroy them all. So in this final manifestation, God is going to allow the Catholic and the Illuminati, forces of the Illuminati and the shadow governments and the globalists, to place a papal and world government seat of power in Jerusalem, revealing their true ambition and revealing, in fact, that they have undertaken a huge conspiracy to achieve that. So the Catholics, of course, have got in bed with the Illuminists, because at this stage the Protestant churches will be under siege, the Jews will be under siege, but the Catholics, who supposedly represent Christianity, will be busy persecuting the saints, as will the Illuminists. And so the Catholics will have shown themselves to actually be inspired of Satan. Now, God is allowing human evil to be manifest for everyone to see, and so here we'll see manifestly that the Catholic Church is wicked and evil, so that God is now fully justified in destroying that church and all who hold to its doctrines. I don't know whether it's going to happen as the Antichrist appears or shortly afterwards or right at the coming of Christ, but there certainly will be something going on from this time onwards, because with this manifestation, God now has the green light to go ahead and bring judgment upon that church, and there are still 3.5 years of history to go at this point. Now we're going to close off with a couple of videos that talk about the connection of the Vatican to Lucifer worship. And Paul, of course, spoke of the apostasy that would be marked by a point in time when the one world religion was going to be announced to the world, and we know this is a Catholic initiative. And as soon as that's announced, then the man of sin will be made manifest to the world, and we will see that it's very closely linked somehow to the Catholic Church. So let's have a look at those two videos.
Flammas eius Lucifer matutinus inveniat, ille in quam Lucifer qui nescit occasum Christus filius tuus, qui regressus ab inferis humano generis serenus iluxit, et tecum vivit et regnat in saecula saeculorum.
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God, I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north, I will ascend above the heights of the clouds, I will be like the Most High.
I believe in the Pope because he believes in peace, and my definition of peace is accepting all religion.
Accepting all religion.
So it was really amazing, because now I'm 31 years old and I never thought about becoming Catholic, and I'm not sure if it's going to happen, of course, but already the thought of it.
This is a pope that struck such a huge chord among so many people in such a short time. But many do now expect him to get down to business and start tackling the very sensitive issues of reform and cleanup of the church. They hope that his humility and simplicity
doesn't. But aside from that, many people say it's Obama. And I have one question for you. Would Obama be the Antichrist, or would it be someone sitting on a throne that looks a little something like this? So what do you guys think? You think that the Antichrist, who is said to be one that is going to exalt himself and sit on a throne as if he is God, does that seem like that could be a Barack Obama when there's a guy overseas sitting on a bigger throne in a bigger temple exalting himself more? No. No. When the Antichrist comes out, he will have the biggest throne on the earth. He will have the most satanic, gaudy, prideful throne. And he will be so deceptively evil. And it's my firm belief that when the Antichrist emerges, he will look exactly like the Jesuses that you see hanging on the Roman Catholic crosses with long hair. He will be a handsome man, charismatic, performing signs and wonders. That's a fact. And my belief, not revelation from God, not prophecy, just common sense from knowing Satan and the way he operates and the way his kingdom operates, my common sense tells me that a man that looks exactly like the Jesus Christ that you see on the History Channel, exactly like the Jesus Christ you saw in Passion of the Christ, exactly like the Jesus Christ you saw in the movie The Bible with long hair, that looks like a white guy with long hair, will sit on a throne in the Vatican performing signs and wonders, or claim that he is the head of the Vatican or the head of the church. He will claim the Roman Catholic Church is his church, because that's the main gaudy temples all over the world. Satan's going to sit in the prideful house. He's going to sit in the temples adorned in gold and the high pillars and the obelisks and all that. Just like the Freemasons have in their temples, just like the Pope and all this. And what he's going to do is he's going to have the long hair, because it's a shame for a man to have long hair. That's what my Bible says. It's a shame for a man to have long hair. Now, there are people I know that are saved, that are true Christians, that have long hair. God is going to let them slide because they feel that that's what God wants, for them to have long hair on their head. The beard doesn't matter, from what I gather. But the hair on the head should not look like a woman's hair. That's why God gave man different authority, and that's why God made a clear contrast that a woman's hair should be long, and nature teaches us it's a shame for a man's hair to be long. And if you want to look it up, I believe look in 1 Corinthians and read chapter 11, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Jesus Christ would no way have long hair, and his apostle Paul is saying it's a shame for a man to have long hair. His greatest follower. Aside from that, I've had people tell me that this means a man should not wear a wig. No, that is not the context of this situation. The situation in Corinthians is a situation of authority, glory, shame, not shame, what nature shows us is right, not a situation of homosexuality and perversion. It's not in context to believe it, for a man to say he's speaking of a wig, that a man shouldn't dress like a woman. That is taking it way into your own hands and making your own rules out of the Bible in that one case. Now, the person that told me this, I know, is a true person of God, so I don't know why they believe this, but I'm teaching it the way I believe it. And it doesn't mean I don't look at someone as a brother in Christ because they have long hair. Because I do, as long as they love Jesus. But I can tell you guys this. In the movie Devil's Advocate, when Keanu Reeves was burning in the fire, his hair grew long. Every rock band that's out there that's satanic backed has long hair. It's not of God, guys. It's not of God. It's bad. If you're a man, your hair should not go beneath your shoulders, in my opinion. Whether you have a beard or not, that's up to you. But I know there's people out there that have... I've gone into groups. Everyone's got a beard. Everyone's got long hair. They all want to look like Jesus. I come in there praying. When they see I have the Holy Spirit, they tell me, when's God going to have you grow out your hair and your beard? And I tell them, never. It's a shame for a man to have long hair. And guys, I put myself in awkward positions like this because I go by the Bible and the Word of God, and I proclaim it with confidence. No matter where I am, no matter how much people aren't going to like it or look at me like I don't know what I'm talking about, trust me, guys. If there's somebody if there's a Jesus hanging in the Roman Catholic Church with long hair, you can rest assured Jesus did not have long hair. Just like everything else going on in that church that's not of God, not one thing, including the way the Son of God looks, including the fact that he doesn't belong even on the cross hanging. So, take a look at this picture right here. This is another picture of this massive satanic throne that they built in the Roman Catholic Church. And what you'll see is a bunch of people burning in a fire behind the throne. Okay, so you saw the Pope sitting there. You see that let me show you another picture, actually, where they shine red light on it to make it look like fire, like the people are burning in the fire. Take a look at this one. And you will see the big Jesus-looking man bursting out of the top, making a sorcerer motion with the arms spread wide, with the long hair. That looks like a beaten-up, disheveled Jesus from the History Channel. Look at this picture. This is a picture of the Pope sitting in front of this satanic altar. And you'll see to the left and the right, there are jesters, literal clowns next to the Pope. Fools, they called them in the old days. They used to call the jester the fool. The fool was considered a man that would walk off a cliff when you told him to. And wealthy people used to hire the fool or the jester to entertain them. This is symbolic that Satan looks at us as fools because he guides us off the cliff and we fall off. There's many symbols of demons with jester hats, skulls, like skeletons with the jester hat. This is from the spirit realm. It's demonic. These beings that are dressed up next to the Pope are satanic dummies. Men that are Satan's fools. And this symbolizes when Satan sits on this throne, there's going to be all these jesters around. Just like in the old days. Just like in the Beyonce video I've been on. Where there's jesters dancing around. And she's dressed like a Freemasonry witch. I want you to know something. Guess who else dresses like Beyonce dressed in that video? Take a picture. Take a look at Snow White. Look at this picture of Snow White. and you'll know where these little outfits that your kids are looking at come from. They come from Satanism and witchcraft. With the red and the blue. The red and the blue is always Illuminati colors, okay? Also in the video I've Been On by Beyonce, there's also a skeleton you'll see on the table out of nowhere, and peacocks, of course. Everything I always talk about, right there for you. It's all lined up. She's got the satanic scepter that the Pope holds with the satanic star on it. Guys, this is a no-brainer that this is likely to be Satan's throne that he's going to sit on when he exalts himself as Antichrist. You see this in Freemasonry temples too, and even on some of the thrones the Pope sits on now. They have all these beings, like all these little baby faces and human faces, almost like they're being like tossed in a fire. You saw it in the movie Devil's Advocate. Behind Milton's desk, Al Pacino, I believe, played in that. Yeah, Al Pacino was in that. And behind his desk he had the same little throne, a little picture of people sitting behind him burning in the fire. They ended up moving around. Here's a picture of that now. Take a look. Okay, guys. So you're getting the hint. A throne that a demonic man or an evil Antichrist-possessed person sits on always looks pretty much the same. Sometimes you'll have a sunburst behind it, which is Baal worship and all this other garbage, and sometimes you'll just have a bunch of human beings burning in a fire. But last time I checked, when Jesus Christ walked the earth, there weren't jesters walking with him. And he didn't have a throne with human beings burning in fire that he sat on. Can anyone find me in the Bible where Jesus Christ carried around jesters with dressed like clowns with stupid pants on? And where Jesus Christ walked around and he basically had a scepter in his hand and sat on a throne with little burning people on it? If you're a Roman Catholic and you're listening to what I'm saying right now, how can you look yourself in the mirror and go back into that church knowing the headship of your church is exalting man above God and will eventually, likely, exalt Antichrist above God? Now, guys, I'm not saying I know for 100% certainty that the Antichrist will raise in the Roman Catholic Church. I'm just 95%. But I'm not going to sit here and pretend like these other people. 666% proof Obama's Antichrist. It's a done deal. Well, guess what, guys? If that's a done deal, we only got 2 years left. And if you believe that, I'm almost okay with it. I think you're stupid, but I'm okay with it because maybe you'll get yourself in line right away. Maybe God sent some tares out to tell people that Obama was Antichrist, so some true people he wanted to draw would get scared and they'd come to God. I don't know. Whatever. I just wanted to show you guys this throne that they built in the Roman Catholic Church, and I'm glad you got to see it. Be blessed in Jesus' name and have a good night.
And so with those two videos we conclude today's session. The videos were certainly interesting in any case because of their expression in a way of the far right views of some Protestants who are probably a little bit too far to the right sometimes, I think. But anyway, the first video was very interesting because the song they sing does have a line where it claims that Christ is the son of Lucifer. Now, I don't know if that's meant in a metaphorical or figurative way, but it certainly looks like a rather strange doctrine and a rather strange line to have in a song to be singing in the Vatican. In the second video, that great throne that sits behind the Pope there in fairness, is called the Resurrection by the Vatican, and the image that's there is supposed to be illustrating Christ bursting out of hell at the resurrection. So you have the images of the hell and the flame around him, but he's bursting out of that. Now, whether he actually went to hell or not is another question. Within the creed of the Catholics, it does say he went into hell. We don't really know exactly what happened, but anyway, it does still form a throne, however, and it is full of rather sort of demonic little images in that throne as well. Anyway, next week we come back and we're going to tackle a series. We're going to look at a video that takes about 2 hours from a woman who is in protective custody from her husband, who was a military person in America. He was involved with a lot of government hit jobs on people. She talks about how the upper levels of the military in America are actually highly involved in homosexuality and other things. And we look at the claim, perhaps, that the modern American hierarchies in many ways are the Sodom that Revelation speaks of when it says the great city in which the two witnesses were found was also called Sodom and Egypt. So we're going to look at that a bit, as well as we're going to look at quite a few of the, we're going to mention a lot of the orders that are in the Freemasonic order in general, their sub-orders, and the kinds of groups in society that are controlled through the Freemasons, and there are many of them. Even the way the royal families are connected to those societies. So we're going to have probably about 2 hours 20 next week, with some reading at the start and then the video. I hope I'll see you there. It's going to be pretty interesting, and quite a bit of detail there. So those who are getting the notes, I certainly recommend you keep getting those notes, and you can read them afterwards as well. So until then, I wish you all the very best. Have a great week, and I truly hope to see you again next week. So bye for now.